landowner's name is Dan Richards. He was a forester, a private forester over on the west side of Oregon, and bought this property as kind of an experimental forest, kind of in the heart of Crook County. Wanted to explore, how treatments would affect different parts of the property.
It's more of a pre-commercial job than a commercial thinning. So we're taking the understory out, the fork trees, the sick and dying diseased trees, and so most of this the expense was covered by selling firewood. There was close to 150, 200 truckloads that came off of this project.
This property did have a lot of juniper encroachment in here, and it was outcompeting with the pine in the first stands. Juniper do suck up a lot of water, and because of that, they do outcompete the pine. And once the pine gets into that competition, they're going to lose. And when they lose, that's when the pine beetle come in. As those pine beetles come in, they will kill that host tree, and then they'll move on to the next, kill that one, and just spreads.
On this particular job, forest health was important, so we wanted to thin it out, give it roughly a 20-foot spacing. So as an operator, I was given the go-ahead to choose which trees came out. So basically, if they had a lot of leader growth, those were the ones that stayed. The more dominant trees stayed unless they had bugs in them, so we thinned from below, not from above. And if they had a good crown ratio, they got to stay. I cut a lot of fork timber out of this because it was logged years ago, roughly 50 years ago. So in those days, they came in and took the best and left the rest.
This stand did have root rot in it, and it was spreading. And it does spread through the root system. And if you can't catch that host before it spreads, it will spread across the stand.
I cut this particular job with a Timco 725. I chose that machine because it had a excavator undercarriage under it, so we weren't tearing up the soil and allowing invasive weeds to come in. The tracks, grousers on them weren't as deep, so it was more of a environmentally friendly machine, less ground compaction.
Winter time is the best time you're going to be able to cut, when you're up on top of that snow and it's frozen underneath. So Steve timed this job to have snow on the ground to minimize soil impact and compaction.
The timing was important because I did a lot of it in the winter time, so we were skidding on the snow, reducing the ground compaction basically, and not having deep skid trails.
There is an osprey nest on the site, and Steve was very diligent to make sure that he was cutting at appropriate times and maintaining that habitat around the nest and not disturbing during fledging season.
The stream that runs through the bottom of this creek is Wickiup drainage, and it's a fish-bearing stream. So it had regular state buffers, and then the landowner, he approached me and wanted a wider buffer than just the state allowed.
He also wanted to remove the juniper that were legally allowed to be removed, but didn't want a track in there. So Steve went to the buffer and was able to reach in and extract those juniper without causing any damage to the soil or the stream bed. We haven't seen any sediment delivery into the stream, and it's been looking great.
It needed opened up. It needed the fire component taken out of it just to release the other trees that are growing. You could tell they were overstocked. The growth rings on them were tight.
When Dan bought this property, there was a lot of juniper encroachment. Juniper is definitely a ladder fuel that adds a dangerous component to the wildland fire danger. This property was probably somewhere between moderate to high fire danger prior to treatment.
So it does make it more fire resistant by cutting the junipers out of it.
In Crook County, we've had an extended drought for 10, 15 years. A lot of those years have been extreme drought, and the juniper encroachment has only exacerbated all of the problems within the timber stand. A lot of the grasses have been overtaken and shaded out. The pines have also been overcompeted.
100% of the juniper came out, even the small ones if I had to cut them by hand or with loppers, but we removed all the juniper off of this landscape here, so it wasn't encroaching in the timber and taking up growing space that a pine or a fir could have and taking the nutrients from that, but it also sucks up a lot of water.
As he opens it up, it reduces the competition for water, which is healthier for the trees, not only for growth patterns, but also for beetle and disease resistance.
Here in Central Oregon, we have the Ips pine beetle, and it infects our ponderosa pine. So that was part of the component with this job. We had to cut out all the pine beetle, and you don't see the red tops in here now that were there when I started on it. So I think this particular stand is a lot healthier.
There are numerous advantages to what Steve has done in here for the forest health and the habitat. We're getting a lot better grass recovery.
There is a lot of wildlife, but from when we started 3 years ago on this, it's noticeably different. There's a lot more elk, a lot more deer, a lot of turkeys, some bears. They feel more protection because you've taken some of that juniper out of it, and so they can go in and graze in the openings, but yet still have some cover.
Arrowhead Logging and Steve Gillen take care and pride in what they're doing and understand what's best for that land.
I think it turned out a good job.